Hello, my friends. Today I want to ask you something that I think about very often. Something that I believe is at the heart of why so many English learners stay stuck for years, studying and working hard, and yet never arriving at the place they want to reach. Here is the question. When was the last time you opened your mouth and spoke English? Not in your head, not silently practicing what you would say if someone asked you something, not reading English words from a screen, but actually, physically, out loud, opened your mouth and let English come out of it. When was the last time that happened? For some of you, it might have been today. For others, it might have been last week. For many of you, if you are honest with yourselves, it might have been so long ago that you cannot quite remember. And if that is the case, if speaking English out loud feels like something that happens rarely, occasionally, only when absolutely necessary, then today I am speaking directly to you. Because today I want to talk about something so simple that most people overlook it completely. Something so obvious that most teachers forget to emphasize it. Something that costs nothing, requires no special equipment, no teacher, no classroom, no partner, and yet has the power to transform your spoken English more than any course you have ever taken. I want to talk about 10 minutes. Just 10 minutes of speaking English out loud every single day. And I want to show you, through stories and honesty and practical guidance, how those 10 minutes, small as they seem, are the single most powerful thing you can do to become a confident, natural, fluent English speaker. So stay with me today, because what I am going to share with you will not just improve your English, it will change your relationship with speaking forever. Let me begin with something very important. Something that most English teachers understand, but do not always communicate clearly enough to their students. Speaking is not just a language skill. Speaking is a physical skill, and this distinction matters enormously. When we say that speaking is a physical skill, we mean that it involves your body just as much as your brain. Your tongue, your lips, your teeth, your jaw, your throat, your breath, your vocal cords. All of these physical structures must coordinate together in precise and complex ways to produce the sounds of English. And like any physical skill, this coordination does not develop through thinking or studying or watching. It develops through doing, through repetition, through practice, through the actual physical act of making the sounds over and over until the movements become natural, automatic, and effortless. Think about a footballer learning to kick a ball with accuracy and power. He does not improve by reading about kicking. He does not improve by watching videos of great kicks. He does not improve by memorizing the physics of ball movement. He improves by kicking. Hundreds of kicks, thousands of kicks, until his foot knows exactly what to do without his brain needing to consciously direct every movement, until the skill lives in his muscles, not just in his mind. Speaking English is exactly the same. You will not improve by reading about English pronunciation. You will not improve by studying grammar rules. You will not improve by watching videos of fluent English speakers. As valuable as all of those things are, you will only improve by speaking, by opening your mouth and producing English sounds with your actual voice every single day, until those sounds, those rhythms, those patterns become part of your physical memory. Until they live in your mouth, not just in your mind. This is the truth that nobody told you. And it is the reason why so many dedicated, hardworking English learners can read well and listen reasonably well and understand a great deal of English, but freeze completely when they need to speak. Because they trained their brain and not their mouth. They studied the language, but they did not practice using it. They understood English with their mind, but their body, their physical speaking apparatus, remained a stranger to it. And 10 minutes every day of actually speaking English out loud is the practice that changes this. That trains your mouth alongside your mind. That makes speaking feel not like a performance you are preparing for, but like a natural activity your body already knows how to do. Let me tell you about a young man named Samir. Samir was 26 years old, and he had been learning English for 11 years. 11 years of classes, textbooks, grammar exercises, vocabulary tests, listening exercises. He had studied harder than most of his classmates. He had spent more time on English than many people he knew, and he understood English reasonably well. He could follow English conversations if people spoke at a moderate pace. He could read English articles on topics he cared about. He could understand English movies with subtitles. But speaking was a completely different story. Every time Samir needed to speak English, something happened inside him that he could not control. His heart beat faster. His mind went blank. The sentences he knew perfectly well in written form refused to come out of his mouth. He would start a sentence and then stop in the middle, unable to find the next word. He would say something and then immediately feel certain it was wrong, even when it was not. He would look at the faces of the people he was speaking to and imagine them judging him, finding his English insufficient, laughing at his accent or his mistakes. And so more and more often he stayed silent. He let others speak while he nodded. He sent written messages instead of making phone calls. He avoided situations where speaking English was required. And every time he avoided speaking, the fear got a little bigger. And the gap between what he understood and what he could express grew a little wider, until speaking English felt not just difficult, but almost impossible. One evening, Samir was watching a video online, and the speaker said something that stayed with him. The speaker said, "Your mouth is a muscle, and like every muscle, it only gets stronger when you use it." And Samir thought about this for a long time. He thought about how he had spent 11 years training his English brain, but had never truly trained his English mouth. He had never given his mouth the practice it needed. He had always waited for the right moment to speak, the right situation, the right level of confidence, the right level of perfection. And the right moment had never come because it never comes. It has to be created. It has to be forced into existence through action. And the action was simple. He needed to speak every day, even alone, even imperfectly, even uncomfortably. Just speak. Samir made a commitment. Every morning, for 10 minutes, he would speak English out loud. Not to anyone, not in a class, not in a formal setting, just alone in his room, speaking English. He started the next morning. He set a timer for 10 minutes. He sat at his desk and he spoke. He talked about his morning, what he had done since waking up, what he planned to do that day, what he was feeling, how the weather was. He spoke in simple sentences at first, short, careful, basic. I woke up at 7. I am tired today. I have a meeting this afternoon. I am a little nervous about it. Simple, imperfect, but spoken, out loud, with his actual voice. And the timer reached 10 minutes, and he stopped. The first morning felt strange. His voice sounded wrong to him in English. His sentences were halting and slow. He stopped many times in the middle of ideas because he could not find the words. He used the same vocabulary over and over because his active vocabulary, the words he could actually produce under pressure, was much smaller than his passive vocabulary, the words he recognized when he saw or heard them. But he did not stop. He came back the next morning, and the morning after that, and something began to happen that surprised him. Not dramatically, not in the first week, but gradually, undeniably, something was changing in his mouth. The sounds were starting to feel more familiar. Sentences were starting to form a little more easily. Words that had hidden from him in the first days began to appear more readily. His mouth was beginning to remember English, beginning to know how English felt from the inside. After 3 weeks, Samir had a phone call with an English-speaking colleague, something he had been dreading for months. And halfway through that call, he noticed something remarkable. He was not thinking about his English. He was just talking, not perfectly, not fluently, but naturally, without the internal translation process that had always slowed him down before, without the freezing and the panic, just talking. And when the call ended, he sat quietly for a moment, and he thought about those 3 weeks of 10-minute morning conversations with himself. 3 weeks of speaking alone in his room, 3 weeks of imperfect, halting, sometimes frustrating practice. And he understood that those 3 weeks had done something that 11 years of studying had not done. They had taught his mouth how to speak English, not his brain, his mouth. And his mouth had been the missing piece all along. Now I want to explain to you exactly what was happening inside Samir during those 3 weeks, because understanding the mechanism helps you trust the process. The first thing that was happening is what language researchers call proceduralization. This is the process by which knowledge that is stored in your memory as explicit information, things you know consciously, things you could write down or explain, becomes procedural. It becomes something your body can do automatically without conscious effort. Think about when you first learned to ride a bicycle. In the beginning, every movement required conscious thought. Lean this way, pedal harder, balance, do not turn too sharply. Every single action was deliberate and effortful. But after enough practice, you stopped thinking about any of it. Your body just knew what to do. The knowledge had become procedural. It had moved from your conscious mind to your body, and riding felt natural. The same process happens with speaking English. In the beginning, producing a sentence requires conscious effort. Choose the right words, check the grammar, remember the pronunciation, put it all together. This takes time. And in real conversation, you do not have that time. Conversation moves too fast for conscious processing. But with daily practice, the process of producing common sentences and expressions begins to proceduralize. It begins to move from effortful conscious processing to automatic physical execution. And as more and more of your spoken English becomes procedural, speaking starts to feel less like solving a puzzle and more like having a conversation. And that shift from puzzle to conversation is what fluency feels like. The second thing that was happening is what I call active vocabulary activation. There is a very important distinction in language learning between passive vocabulary and active vocabulary. Passive vocabulary includes all the words you can recognize and understand when you see or hear them. Active vocabulary includes only the words you can produce spontaneously when you need them under the time pressure of real communication. For most English learners, passive vocabulary is much larger than active vocabulary. They know thousands of words when they see them, but can only reliably produce hundreds when they need to speak. And closing this gap, expanding active vocabulary, is one of the most important things that daily speaking practice does. When you speak for 10 minutes every day, you are not just practicing pronunciation and fluency. You are forcing your brain to activate vocabulary under pressure. You are putting words to use. And words that are put to use become active. They become available. They move from the passive archive of recognition to the active toolkit of production. This is why people who speak a lot in English often seem to have better vocabulary than people who just study vocabulary lists. Not because they know more words, but because the words they know are active, available, ready to be used at a moment's notice. And 10 minutes of daily speaking practice is the fastest, most effective way to build that active vocabulary, to move words from knowing to using. Let me now talk about how to do your 10 minutes of daily speaking practice, because the how matters enormously. And I want to give you a method that is simple enough to actually do, structured enough to produce real results, and flexible enough to fit into any life and any schedule. The method has several approaches, and I want to describe all of them so that you can choose the ones that feel most natural to you. The first approach is what I call the daily narrative. This is the simplest and most accessible form of speaking practice, and it is exactly what Samir did in his early morning sessions. Every morning, you narrate your day. You speak out loud about what you did yesterday, what you are doing today, what you plan to do tomorrow. You talk about your feelings, your thoughts, your observations. You describe your environment. You share your opinions about things you have experienced. There is no script, no preparation, no right answer. You simply open your mouth and talk about your life in English. This approach is powerful for several reasons. First, you always have material. You always have a life. You always have something that happened or something you are thinking about. There is never a shortage of content. Second, the vocabulary of daily life is the vocabulary of daily conversation. The words you use to describe your morning, your commute, your work, your relationships are exactly the words you need in real English conversations. And third, this approach trains you to think in English about real situations, not to translate from your native language, but to go directly from experience to English expression. And that directness, that ability to think in English rather than through English, is one of the hallmarks of genuine fluency. The second approach is what I call structured monologue. This is slightly more formal than the daily narrative, but equally powerful. In a structured monologue, you choose a topic before your session and you speak about it for several minutes. You explain it, you discuss it, you share your opinion about it. Choose topics you find genuinely interesting. A recent news story, a book you are reading, a problem you are thinking about, a memory you want to describe, a place you would like to visit, a person you admire, anything. The topic is less important than the act of organizing your thoughts and expressing them in English. Because organizing thoughts in another language is a profound skill. It requires you to structure ideas, to sequence information, to connect one thought to the next, all in real time, all in English. And practicing this every day builds a kind of cognitive fluency that is different from just knowing words and grammar. It is the ability to think coherently in English. And that ability is what makes someone a genuinely confident, effective English communicator. The third approach is role play. This is particularly valuable for people who need English for specific purposes, for work, for travel, for study, for particular social situations. In role play, you create imaginary scenarios and you speak through them. You pretend you are making a presentation to your team in English. You pretend you are at a job interview. You pretend you are checking into a hotel in a foreign country. You pretend you are meeting someone at a conference for the first time. You speak both sides of the conversation if you need to. You practice the specific language of specific situations. And this kind of targeted practice is enormously effective because it prepares you for real situations before you are in them. So that when you actually stand in front of a job interviewer or check into a hotel or make that presentation, your mouth already knows how to do it. The situation is not entirely new. Your body has already been there in practice and it remembers. The fourth approach is reading aloud. I mentioned this in our discussion about reading, but it belongs equally in a discussion about speaking practice. Take any piece of English text that you find interesting and read it aloud, with expression, with the full use of your voice. Try to make it sound natural. Try to bring the words to life. This approach trains your pronunciation, your rhythm, your intonation, and your confidence with the actual sounds of English. It also builds the connection between written English and spoken English, which is a connection that many learners have not fully developed. When you read aloud regularly, your mouth learns the shapes of English words. It learns how they feel to say. And that physical familiarity with English words is something that transfers directly to spontaneous speaking. Now I want to address something that I know is in the minds of many of you right now. You are thinking, speaking to myself feels strange. Speaking alone feels unnatural. How can talking to myself possibly be the same as talking to another person? And I understand this concern completely. Conversation with another person involves listening, responding, adapting, managing social dynamics. And practicing alone does not give you all of those things, but it gives you something equally important, and in some ways more important. It gives you physical fluency. It gives your mouth practice producing English without the pressure of another person waiting, without the fear of judgment, without the anxiety of social stakes. And that pressure-free practice is exactly what most people need most urgently. Because the physical act of producing English, the coordination of tongue and lips and breath and voice to make English sounds, needs to become automatic before you can focus on the social and communicative aspects of real conversation. If your mouth is struggling to produce the sounds, you cannot listen properly to the other person. You cannot respond thoughtfully. You cannot manage the natural flow of conversation. But when the physical production becomes automatic, when your mouth knows how to make English sounds without your brain having to work hard on it, then your mind is free to focus on meaning, on connection, on the actual human exchange that is the heart of real conversation. So speaking alone is not a substitute for conversation with others, but it is the foundation that makes conversation with others possible. It is the practice that gets your mouth ready, and a mouth that is ready is a mouth that can speak. Let me talk now about something that I consider one of the most powerful tools in speaking practice, and that is recording yourself. When Samir practiced speaking every morning, he did something that made his practice dramatically more effective. He recorded himself. He used his phone, pressed record, and spoke into it for 10 minutes. And then he listened back. And this step, this listening to himself, was where much of his real learning happened. Because when you listen to yourself speak English, you hear things that you cannot feel or know while you are speaking. You hear where you stop and search for words. You hear which sounds you are producing incorrectly. You hear which sentences come out naturally and which ones sound stilted and translated. You hear where your rhythm breaks down. You hear the difference between your English and the English of fluent speakers. And hearing all of this clearly, without the distraction of trying to speak at the same time, gives you precise information about exactly what you need to work on. Most people dislike hearing their own voice. This is normal, almost universal. When you first record yourself and listen back, you may cringe. You may feel embarrassed. You may feel like your English is worse than you thought. But I want to tell you something very important about that feeling. That feeling is your awareness growing. That feeling is the gap between where you are and where you want to be becoming visible to you. And a visible gap can be closed. A gap you cannot see cannot be worked on. So that cringe, that discomfort, that critical awareness of your own English speaking is not a sign of failure. It is a sign of growing understanding. It is the beginning of improvement because now you know, now you can hear, now you have specific information about what to work on. And with that information, your 10 minutes of daily practice becomes not just activity, but targeted, intelligent, progressive training. I want to talk now about fear, because speaking English is about more than just physical practice. For many people, maybe for most people, the biggest barrier to speaking is not lack of knowledge or lack of skill. It is fear. Fear of making mistakes, fear of being judged, fear of sounding stupid, fear of not being understood, fear of the embarrassment that comes when your English fails you in front of others. And I want to talk about this fear honestly, not dismiss it, not tell you to just get over it, but look at it carefully and honestly and show you what it really is. When I was young and I rode my bicycle every morning to practice English with tourists, I was afraid every single morning. I was a young boy approaching adult strangers from foreign countries and trying to communicate with them in a language I was still learning. Every morning I felt the fear before I spoke, the heart beating a little faster, the slight tightness in the chest, the internal voice saying, maybe not today, maybe tomorrow will be better, maybe you are not ready yet. And every morning I spoke anyway, not because the fear went away, but because I decided that the fear was less important than the learning. That feeling afraid and speaking anyway was better than feeling safe and staying silent. And here is what I discovered, that every time I spoke despite the fear became a little smaller, not gone, but smaller. And the confidence became a little bigger, not complete, but bigger. And slowly, over months and years, the balance shifted until the confidence was much larger than the fear. And speaking English became not something I was afraid of, but something I was good at, something I even enjoyed. This is the truth about fear in language learning. It does not go away by preparing more. It does not go away by studying more. It does not go away by waiting until you feel ready. It only goes away by speaking and surviving, by speaking and being understood even imperfectly, by speaking and making mistakes and discovering that the world does not end, that people do not laugh, that mistakes are simply the tuition you pay for improvement. And every day that you speak for 10 minutes, even alone in your room, even to yourself, you are practicing the act of speaking despite fear. You are training your nervous system to associate English speaking with safety rather than danger. And that training, done consistently, will gradually change your relationship with speaking English from something you fear to something you do, automatically, naturally, without a second thought. Let me tell you about something that I have observed many times and that I think is one of the most important insights about spoken English learning. There is a stage in language learning that researchers sometimes call the silent period, a time when the learner has absorbed a great deal of English through reading and listening, but has not yet begun to produce it actively, a time when the language is living inside them, but has not yet found its way out. And many learners stay in this silent period for far too long, not because they are not ready to speak, but because they are waiting to feel ready, waiting until their English is good enough, waiting until they are sure they will not make mistakes. And the cruel irony of this waiting is that the only thing that can end the silent period is speaking. The language cannot come out until you let it out. The words cannot become active until you activate them. The mouth cannot become fluent until you open it. So if you have been in a silent period, if you have been waiting to speak, then today is the day that waiting ends. Not because your English is perfect, not because you are ready, but because you have decided that speaking imperfectly is better than staying silent perfectly. And that decision, made and acted on every morning for 10 minutes, will end your silent period, one sentence at a time. I want to give you now something very practical, a 30-day speaking challenge that you can begin tomorrow morning. Not a complicated program, not a demanding schedule, just a simple, clear daily practice that will build your speaking confidence and fluency in 30 days more than anything else you have tried. Here is how it works. For the first 10 days, your only goal is to speak. Not to speak well, not to speak fluently, not to speak without mistakes, just to speak. Every morning, set a timer for 10 minutes. Start the timer, open your mouth, and talk. Talk about anything, your morning, your plans, something you are thinking about, something you saw yesterday, something that made you happy or frustrated, anything. The content does not matter. The only thing that matters is that you speak English out loud for 10 continuous minutes. When you do not know a word, describe around it. When you lose your train of thought, restart the sentence. When you make a mistake, continue anyway. Do not stop. Do not edit. Do not judge. Just speak for 10 minutes, every single morning. And at the end of the 10 minutes, do one thing. Write down one thing you noticed, one word you did not know, one sentence that felt difficult, one sound that did not come out right. Just one thing. This is your feedback. This is what you will work on tomorrow. For days 11 to 20, keep speaking every morning, but add one new element. Every day, choose a specific topic before you begin. Something specific enough to give you direction, but open enough to let you speak freely. For example, describe your best memory from childhood. Talk about a person who influenced you. Explain what you would do if you had one free year. Describe your ideal home. Talk about something you learned recently that surprised you. These topics push you to use a wider range of vocabulary and grammar than simply narrating your day. They push you to organize thoughts, to sequence ideas, to express opinions and feelings and memories. This is closer to what real conversation requires, and practicing it every day for 10 minutes builds the kind of fluency that transfers directly to real speaking situations. For days 21 to 30, add the recording element. Every morning, record your 10-minute speaking session. Listen back to the recording in the evening for about 5 minutes. Not to judge yourself, not to count your mistakes, but to notice 3 things. First, what sounds natural and confident in your English? Find at least one thing you said well, one sentence that came out clearly, one moment where your English flowed. Acknowledge it. It is real. Second, find one specific thing that you want to improve, one word you mispronounced, one expression you used in a non-natural way, one sentence structure that felt clumsy. Just one. And tomorrow morning, consciously try to do that one thing better. Third, listen for any words you avoided, any topics you stayed away from because you were not sure of the vocabulary. Make a note of those gaps. Look up the words you needed, and tomorrow, use them. This 30-day practice, followed consistently, will not make you fluent. Fluency takes longer, but it will do something equally important. It will prove to you that you can speak English, that your mouth is capable, that improvement is real and measurable. And that proof, once you have it, changes everything about your relationship with speaking, because you are no longer someone who is hoping to speak English. You are someone who does speak English every morning as a matter of habit, as a matter of identity. And from that identity, everything else grows. Now I want to talk about something that happens after you have been doing your 10 minutes of daily speaking practice for a while. Something that I consider one of the most beautiful transformations in language learning. And that is the moment when you stop monitoring yourself. In the beginning of speaking practice, you are always aware of yourself. You are listening to yourself as you speak, checking your grammar, monitoring your pronunciation, catching your mistakes. And this self-monitoring is useful in the early stages. It helps you notice what needs work, but it also slows you down. It interrupts the flow. It puts your brain in 2 places at once, trying to speak and trying to evaluate the speaking at the same time. But as you practice more, as speaking becomes more automatic, this self-monitoring begins to fade. You start to trust your mouth more. You start to let the language come out without checking every word before it leaves you. And this is when real fluency begins to emerge. When you stop thinking about your English and start thinking about what you want to say. When the language becomes transparent and the meaning becomes the focus. This is what Samir experienced on that phone call after 3 weeks of practice. He was not thinking about his English, he was just talking. And that shift from thinking about language to thinking through language is the shift from learner to speaker. And 10 minutes every day is what builds you toward that shift. Let me tell you something from my own experience that I want you to keep with you. When I stood on stages in front of thousands of people and spoke in English, people often said to me afterwards, "You speak so naturally. You speak with such confidence." And I always thought about where that confidence came from. It did not come from not making mistakes. I made mistakes. It did not come from having a perfect accent. I had my own accent. It came from having spoken so many times in so many situations, starting from those early mornings near the hotel in my city, that speaking had become part of who I was. Not a performance, not a skill I was demonstrating, just a thing I did, naturally, automatically, comfortably. And that comfort was built one speaking session at a time, one morning at a time, one imperfect, courageous, honest attempt at a time. You are building that same comfort right now. Every time you speak English, even alone, even imperfectly, even for just 10 minutes, you are adding one more session to the foundation of your confidence. One more morning of telling your body that speaking English is safe, that you can do this, that your mouth knows how. And day by day, that foundation grows, stronger, deeper, more solid, until one day you find yourself in a real English conversation and you realize with a quiet surprise that you are not afraid, that the words are coming, that you are not translating, that you are not freezing, that you are just talking. And in that moment, those 10 minutes every morning will feel like the best investment you ever made, because they will have given you something that no amount of studying or listening or reading alone could have given you. They will have given you your English voice, real, alive, confident, and completely your own. So here is what I am asking you to do today. Just one thing. Tonight, decide what you will talk about tomorrow morning. Choose a topic, any topic, something real to you, something you care about. Put your phone somewhere easy to reach. Set an alarm 10 minutes earlier than usual. And tomorrow morning when that alarm goes off, sit up, press record, and speak. For 10 minutes, out loud, in English. Not perfectly, not fluently, just honestly. Just you and the language and 10 minutes of courage. And then do it again the day after, and the day after that. Every single morning. Because your English voice is already inside you. It has been growing there through all the reading and listening and studying you have done. It just needs to come out. And the only way out is through your mouth. Open it, speak, and let what is inside you come into the world. Thank you, my friends, for staying with me today. I hope this has given you not just a method, but a feeling. The feeling that you are ready. Not ready to be perfect, but ready to begin. And beginning is everything. Your mouth is a muscle. It is time to use it. I will see you in the next one.